Hello everyone, welcome to my medieval cloak tutorial. This technically wouldn't be considered a cloak, this would be considered a mantle because it's quite short. However, you can always extend the pattern to make a cloak if you'd like, totally up to you. This is a pretty intensive project and I hope you all can follow along. I do use an embroidery machine for this project, but you can still follow along using a hand-stitched or glued applique method. You can also cut the shapes out of leather for a really cool look as well. I'll do my best to explain what I'm doing as I'm going, but if you have any questions or want a more detailed video, just let me know in the comments. And now I've just sketched the basic design as it would look on a flat piece of paper or fabric. I've included the measurements here so you can pause and have a closer look at them. It's important to note that the radius of the cloak is not a perfect circle. It is shorter in the front than it is in the back. This is to allow a little bit more freedom of movement in the arms. Draw the shape from the previous sketch onto a piece of cardboard or stiff paper using the measurements provided. I just roughly sketched the scroll pattern on my piece of paper just to see what it would look like. Now the hood you can play around with when it comes to shape. The only thing I would suggest not changing is the height of the hood and the length of the neckline. For the tail you can make it longer, shorter, wider, whatever you'd like. I highly recommend making a mock-up out of some really cheap fabric. Now you're going to want to get out your fabric and make sure everything is ironed and there's no wrinkles. This pattern used about 2 to 3 meters depending on the width of your fabric. Okay, now you want to lay the pattern piece out on the fabric. Make sure the fabric is folded in half and that it's nice and flat, and weigh the pattern down, making sure that it's right on the edge of that fold. So now you want to trace around the pattern piece with an erasable pen. You can use chalk or whatever you prefer. But don't lose track of which side is the front and which side is the back because they're different lengths, so you might want to mark those. Okay, now it's time to cut your fabric. Make sure you have it on the fold. It's very important. And make sure that your side marks and everything are on the inside of the line so that you don't cut them off when you go around. After you finish cutting it out, make sure that your side marks are on both sides of the fabric, on both ends of the fabric. And then cut along the fold on the short side. You'll see in the video what I mean. Make sure you do not cut the long side and only cut the short side. And there you can see the slip folded the other way. And then I drape it on a mannequin just so you can get a visual. Now it's time to cut out the hood pattern. This does not have to be on the fold, but make sure your pattern is flat and your fabric is flat. It's much easier if you were to work on a floor or a large table. Okay, this part is pretty self-explanatory. You just cut out the two pieces, being careful they don't slip around if you're cutting them both at the same time. The fabric that I'm using is quite thick, so they can get skewed if you're not careful, so just watch for that. Okay, now just put the hood aside for a second. We will deal with that shortly. Okay, this next part is a little bit tricky, but you'll want to make a 3-inch curved strip that is 2 inches away from the bottom edge. Now you can see me using that pattern to cut out a piece of contrasting fabric. This will be my scrollwork border. This is where I use my embroidery machine. You guys can just cut out the shapes and hand stitch it, or you could cut out shapes and glue it. You could really put any kind of shapes in this border that you'd like, out of any material really that you'd like. You could use leather or faux leather. It's really just a matter of preference. I like the really feminine look, but you can definitely make it more masculine using leather or faux leather or even suede. Now I'm just pinning that strip onto my main fabric, making sure that it is evenly spaced and in the proper area. It's not stretched or anything. Just if you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, just make sure that it's in the right place, otherwise you will have an uneven border. Now just make sure you've done this all around the whole circle and on both sides, and make sure everything's lined up. Now just make sure you've done this to both sides and that everything is lined up right. I'll show you it draped on a mannequin after. Okay, now is when I start attaching my applique shapes onto each hood piece. You can do this by hand or you can do this by machine. And if any of you guys want me to show you in a separate video how to do that by machine or how to do it by hand, just let me know and I can make another video. And here you can see me just pinning the hood pieces together, right sides together. The little bits at the end is just stabilizer from the embroidery machine. Just ignore that. I'm sure I'll pick it out later. I should also add here, it may seem obvious to some of you, but do not stitch the neckline closed and do not stitch the straight edge of the opening for the hood. Okay, so now I'm gonna stitch along the edges that I just finished pinning. I'm just using the presser foot as a guide. I did not add seam allowance to any of the pattern pieces because it wasn't really necessary. Just follow along where you pinned and make sure to leave the neck hole open and the height of the hood opening unstitched. Now I'm just clipping the corners. In the very tip of this point, it is very important to cut out a lot of the excess bulk of the fabric. And also in the gentle curve of where the tail meets the back of the hood, just clip those really quick. Now I'm just using the decorative stitch on my sewing machine. This is not really required, but I laid this seam flat so that it was open, and then I stitched on the top directly down the center of the line with this X kind of pattern. It gives a really nice medieval kind of look, like it had been hand stitched. And here I just draped it over the mannequin just to get a kind of an idea of how it was looking so far. And then here I go into the scroll work appliques for the border. Once I did the scrolls most of the way around, I did leave an area at the back because I wanted to do a bigger kind of round emblem of some sort in embroidery. And now I get out my fancy little scissors and I start cutting out my appliques. I just go around the outside edges and then I go back and cut out the little pieces in the middle. And here I just laid everything out to get an idea of what it looks like. Okay, and now we'll move on to part 2.